Whether you've bought a pack of fresh herbs at the grocery store and only used a tablespoon, or you've grown a ton of fresh herbs in your garden and you're trying to figure out how to save them from your compost pile, this video is for you. I tested every herb preservation method that I could find to see what actually works and discovered some ways that taste almost fresh and some that are not worth the hassle. I started with drying, and most people know that you can dry herbs, but there are 4 different ways that you can do it, and I wanted to see which one was best using my abundant supply of oregano. Number 1 was in the oven at the lowest setting for 45 minutes, which is about 170 degrees Fahrenheit. This had basically no flavor left. Number 2 was using a dehydrator at 95 degrees Fahrenheit for 12 hours, and the flavor was really good on this one. Number 3 was air dried hanging upside down for 10 days, and the flavor was also decent on this one. Not quite as good as the dehydrator, but pretty good. And what blew me away was number 4, using the microwave. These retained so much color and a lot of flavor in a fraction of the time, only about 2 minutes. If you want to try the microwave method, start with a hardy herb for best results, and then just rinse and dry the herbs, pick off the leaves and layer them between 2 non-recycled paper towels or a clean dish towel. Then just microwave for 1 minute on high, and then microwave for 10 seconds at a time, checking in between each one to see how it's going. Once the leaves are crispy, you are done. I'll still use a dehydrator or air dry when I have a lot of herbs to get through, but for smaller amounts, the microwave is kind of hard to beat. Next up is freezing, and this is great for all the tender herbs that lose most of their flavor when they're dried. Chives hold up surprisingly well, and if you want them to stay sprinkleable, chop them up and freeze them in a single layer, then transfer them to an airtight container or freezer storage bag that has a little bit of airspace. Next is creating herb rolls, and this works great for parsley and cilantro. Just roll it up with some parchment paper, cover it with foil, and then when you want to take some out, it's kind of already set up for you to finely chop just as much as you need. Some herbs like basil, mint, and shiso will turn black if they are frozen and thawed unless you blanch them first. To do that, just bring some water up to a boil and drop your herbs in for about 15 seconds, then transfer them to an ice bath. Then you want to just squeeze as much water as you can out and follow the same process that I just showed with the parsley. This method is so easy and you get really good results, so it's definitely one that I'm going to try again. Next is creating herb ice cubes, and the problem a lot of people seem to have with this is that the herbs will float. So instead of just packing the herbs in dry and then pouring water over the top, I suggest finely chopping the herbs and mixing them in with just a little bit of water or oil, so most of the cube is herbs. I really love this method because it saves them in exact tablespoon size servings, and that is often what you need for recipes. I was really excited about this next method because I'd heard that if you layer basil and salt in a jar, you can have fresh basil for months, and I love making Thai curry in the winter, so I really wanted to try this with Thai basil. But you may be thinking what I started to think right about now, that this is a lot of salt and not that much basil. This would be enough for maybe 2 meals. When I went to take the basil leaves out, they were definitely dehydrated, which makes sense, and it was difficult to get the salt off, so it didn't feel very fresh, and I didn't feel like I could use this as a garnish. I tried it with mint and sugar though, and that I actually loved. The mint leaves are kind of like little breath fresheners, and over time I'm getting a really lovely infused sugar as well. This just takes up too much space in the fridge, so it's probably not something I'm going to try again. I think a much better use of salt in this context is making fancy herbed salts. This is especially great if there are common combinations that you cook with. I made an Herbs de Provence inspired salt. I packed a 1/4 cup full of lavender, basil, thyme, oregano, sage, and rosemary, and blended them in a food processor for a little bit. Then I added 1 cup of salt and pulsed it a few more times. Just spread that out on a baking sheet and put it in your oven at the lowest setting for about an hour. And when you take it out, you probably will have to break up the salt a little bit, but you can transfer it to some cute jars, and then I recommend storing this in the fridge just in case there's a little extra moisture in there. But these are a perfect little topper for potatoes or eggs, and they also make a really nice gift. Next up is infused vinegar, and this doesn't use up a ton of herbs, but it is delicious, super easy, and so pretty. Start with a hot sterilized jar. I sterilized mine just by boiling them for 10 minutes, and add 4 sprigs of herbs and crush them up a little bit. Then pour 2 cups of hot vinegar vinegar over the top. I used white wine vinegar. Then you can just let these sit for 2 to 4 weeks and taste test them along the way. Or if you happen to have a sous vide, you can speed this up pretty significantly by putting them in 165-degree Fahrenheit water for 1 to 3 hours. Once it tastes good to you, then you can strain out the used herbs and put the vinegar into another sterilized bottle, and I like to add one more sprig of herbs in there for presentation. This is amazing basically anywhere you would use vinegar, in salad dressings or to add a little bit of brightness to soups, and I think it also makes a really good gift. Despite what a lot of people think, butter and oil are not great long-term preservatives on their own if you're adding fresh herbs, but combined with freezing, these two methods work very well. First, I made a cilantro lime compound butter. I used a half cup of room temperature butter, a quarter cup of chopped cilantro, 1 minced clove of garlic, the zest from 1 lime and the juice from half of it. Just mix it up really well and then put that on some parchment paper and roll it up and stick it in your fridge or freezer. It'll last for a couple weeks in the fridge and a couple of months in the freezer. And I have to say, I've made plenty of cilantro lime rice in my day, but this was some of the best I've ever had. The next thing I really wanted to try is infused oil, and I've heard that basil oil is like the peak gourmet experience out of all of these. My food processor unfortunately stopped working on me halfway through this video, so I took my bunch of basil and a half cup of avocado oil and put them into my high-speed blender. I blended that up for a little bit and then added another half cup of high-quality olive oil, and I let that blend for about a minute. I've heard people recommend to chill the oil first because the blending process cooks it a little bit, and I just gotta be honest, I completely forgot to do that. So if you have the time to do that, I think it's probably a good idea. But once it's blended together, just put it in a container and put it in the fridge so that the flavors can meld a little bit. Then the next day you want to just take some cheesecloth and a funnel and strain that into a squeeze bottle. I froze about half of this to use later, but in the meantime, combined with that basil vinegar, so good on a caprese salad. Sometimes you really do just need fresh herbs in the winter though, so I'm gonna work on an indoor herb gardening setup this winter, and if you want to watch that video, I will post it here when it's ready.